Hey there. So here is an example problem that is given in the math lab that's very similar to the review problem that you're working on right now, the 12.2.27. And this is, as you can see, pretty much exactly the same problem, just with different numbers, but it's the same situation. So there is a table that shows the sales of the 15 top selling colors and types of car for a car company and during a particular month. So it's asking you to construct a frequency distribution with the first class of 23 through 29. And that information is given to you kind of in an empty table for you to fill in. So part A says construct a frequency distribution with a first class of 23 through 29. Now, one thing that's important to know about frequency distributions is that all of your classes, okay, so all the intervals that fall down here on this side of the table have to be the same, and every number in the data set needs to be accounted for. So let me explain to you what I mean by that. So you'll notice the range here between 23 and 29, that gives you a range of 6, right? Because it's technically 7 numbers if you were to count them on your fingers. 23 to 29 is actually 7 numbers, but the shortcut that helps me to figure out, where I need to do my intervals is that I know 29 minus 23 is 6. So that helps me to figure out what my next interval needs to be because the book didn't give me the rest of the intervals, right? So I got to decide what the next one is going to be. And I know that if all the numbers have to be included, that means that my next class or my next interval needs to start with 30, right? Because if we ended with 29, then we've got to start with our next one to be 30. So I know that in order to make it the same interval, I need to have that 30 and whatever number I end the interval with needs to have a difference of 6. Because again, here, 29 minus 23 is 6. They all have to have the same difference going all the way down. So that means that the highest number in this interval needs to be a 36. Obviously, if I ended with 36, I now need to start with 37 for my next class. And again, sticking with that trend of adding 6, my next one needs to be 43. And I'm going to stop here for a second because I know that I need to keep adding classes, but it would be a good idea if I know ahead of time about where I need to stop, right? So I'm looking on my table, and thank goodness this table is actually in numerical order for us from the greatest number of sales to the least. So we know that the largest number that needs to be accounted for in our frequency table is 68. So I know once I get to a class that includes 68, I'm done. So I'm actually gonna just keep adding classes here for a minute. Again, since I ended with 43, I know my next class is gonna start with 44. And again, keep in mind we're adding that 6. So my next class is gonna be 50. And I'll pick up the next class is gonna be 51. Oops, I don't know why I just added that. And adding 6 means my next interval will end at 57. Then I'll go from 58 to 64. Then I will go from 65 to 71. And now I can stop because 71 is high enough that it's included, this last interval, 65 to 71, includes the biggest number that I have on my data set. It's important to know that for my frequency table to be correct, I can't just say 65 to 68, right? Because this has a difference of 3, whereas all my other intervals have a difference of 6. So even though we only need the numbers to go up to 68 in order to include all the numbers on the table, we still need to end our last class here at 71 so that all of these intervals still have that same common difference of 6. So now the next step, on your screen, you've got these little boxes that need to be filled in. I'm not going to, just for the sake of neatness, I'm going to take those boxes away, but I'm filling in those boxes that appear on your end of the My Math Lab, and I'm filling them in by, let's look at our first class, 23 to 29. So I am now going to look on my table and I'm going to see how many numbers from my sales column fit between that first range of 23 to 29. So I've got 1, 2, 3, and 4. So that means, because this is a frequency table, okay, a frequency table tells you how many times, like how frequent is a number that falls between 23 and 29. Well, it came up 4 times. So I'm going to write a 4 right there next to the interval class of between 23 and 29. Now I need to see how many fall between 30 and 36. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Well, not in between, but I guess I should say fall within that interval. So I have 6 of those. Oops, it would help if the math teacher could count, wouldn't it? I actually have one more right there. So that is not a 6. There are actually 7 numbers that fall in that interval of 30 to 36. Then between 37 and 43, you'll see that there are no numbers that fall between 37 and 43. So that means we're just going to write 0 here. There are also no numbers that fall within the interval of 44 to 50, because you can tell our table is going to start off here in the 60s in a second. So I've got a 0 there also. And I also have another 0 for this next interval because we don't have any numbers that would fall within the interval of 51 to 57. Now, let's see what how many, I should say, how frequently a number pops up that is between 58 and 64. So I've got 1, 2, and 3 of those. And finally, I've got one last number that falls within the interval of 65 to 71. So I have just answered part A. I constructed a frequency distribution with a first class of 23 to 29. Now I've got to do part B, where I've got to take that information and construct a histogram. So I'm going to scoot this over here to the side. Because remember, you're going to actually use the information in this frequency distribution to create the histogram. So I don't really need the rest of this problem right now. And I obviously need some room to make the histogram. So I know that the question on your math lab assignment is multiple choice, but I'm going to walk you through how to actually construct one of these. And there's some key things that you need to remember for your histogram as well. So first of all, you're going to need your X and your Y axis. And along the x-axis, you are going to place the sales. And remember, right now I'm just kind of sketching. Remember, a histogram is, really kind of a bar graph, right? But it's a little more complicated than that, because in maybe the bar graphs we did when we were small kids, you just had one number here, and then the bar graph would just tell you how many times that one number came up. Here you're actually doing a range of numbers. So it's a little more complicated, still perfectly manageable though. So the middle of your bar is going to be the midpoint of the interval. And let me show you what I mean by that. And again, you're gonna have to forgive me. I'm a really lousy drawer, so I'm gonna apologize in advance. So let's take our first interval that we have right here, 23 to 29. If you find the midpoint, that is the number that is in between 23 and 29, and there's a few different ways you can do it. I personally think the easiest way is just to find the mean of those two numbers. So I would add together 23 and 29, and I would get 52, and then I would do 52 divided by 2, and that would give me 26. So that means the midpoint of that very first class, that very first interval, is 26. So that is actually going to be the midpoint of your bar when you're making your bar graph. And the midpoint, I'm going to find the other ones exactly the same way. So my midpoint between 30 and 36. Again, I lean towards using the mean, but you certainly don't have to do it that way. 30 plus 36, of course, is 66. And 66 divided by 2 is 33. So my next bar will be centered above the number 33. I think you get where I'm going with this. So I'm going to find the midpoint for all of these other classes. And it might be a good idea for you to pause the video and try to figure out what those midpoints would be yourself, and then to restart the video and check with me in a second. So here you can see that I have created a midpoint for each one of these intervals that we have over here in our frequency table. I do have them color coded so that it might make it a little bit easier for you to see exactly which interval they came from. So again, I just found the mean of each of the bottom number of the interval and the top number to find the middle. Now, what's always good practice in math, of course, I need to make sure that I label what the heck this part of the graph means. So I'm writing sales in thousands. And in order to figure out how tall my bars need to be, now I need to look in this column, my number of vehicle sales. I'm going to go ahead and label okay, so you'll see I've got my label in green there along the y-axis that lets you know that that's my number of vehicles. And of course I need numbers, right? So I can tell in my number of vehicles, I've got numbers going all the way from 0 up to 7. So really the most straightforward thing to do is just to count up by 1 from 0 to 7. So that is what I've done here. And now I need to have my bar that is going to be made to represent how many vehicles fell within that class of sales. So, for example, we'll look at our first one. And I know this is kind of getting a little bit cluttered here. Sorry, guys, I've got an awful lot of writing here at this point. But my first interval from 23 to 29, of course, is going to be right here at the midpoint of 26. So I'm going to construct a bar over that midpoint, and the bar needs to be as high as the number of vehicles that for. So my bar is going to look, again, I'm a really bad drawer, guys, sorry. It's going to look a little something like this. The midpoint-ish, and I'm a little bit off here, of the bar is above the 26, and it has a height of 4 to represent the fact that 4 vehicles fell within the 23 to 29 interval. My next interval, this 30 to 36, of course, the bar will be constructed over the midpoint right here, and it needs to go all the way up to 7 to represent the fact that 7 vehicles fell within that interval. It's going to look a little something like this. So what I would suggest, I'm going to go ahead and finish constructing the histogram, and I suggest you, if you're following along at home, maybe pause the video, try to construct your own, make sure that yours ends up looking a little something like mine. Okay, so as you can see, now that I've finished constructing mine, you'll see that obviously I didn't have bars that went over these 3, because their frequency was 0. So we have a bar, or 3 bars, I guess technically there's a bar there, but it's just 0 units high. Oh, I forgot to label my 0, didn't I? On my y-axis right there. There we go. So technically, I guess there are bars there, but they're just, 0. And my one that I constructed right here was 3 high to coincide with the number of vehicles being 3. And my final bar here was 1 high to correspond with the number of vehicles in that interval being 1. So we have finished part B. We have constructed a histogram to represent our data. The very last part of the question is asking us to construct a frequency polygon. And a frequency polygon is a line graph, and it has scales that are the same as those in the histogram. So I'm really going to use, I'm going to scoot this over here. I'm really using the same scales that I did a moment ago to make my histogram. So really I'm just recreating all of that, which I'm going to do very quickly. So you'll see that my scales, again, I apologize guys for the artistry here. It's exactly the same. Same numbers, same labels, all of that. The only difference is that now we're going to use a coordinate to mark where the frequency falls. So before I had a bar above the 26 that went up to 4. Now I'm simply going to place a coordinate right here at 26 and 4. The 33 had a bar that was centered above the 33 and that was 7 units high. So now we're simply going to place a coordinate right there. The 40 obviously didn't have anything. Now before we didn't place a bar, but we still need to place something on the graph in this case to represent that. So we are going to put coordinates here at 40 and 47 and 54 to represent the fact that no number of vehicles fell within that number of sales. And the 61, of course, went up to 3. So we're going to place a coordinate right here. I'm very visual. It's easier for me to see it this way. So where 61 and 3 intersect. So right there, these lines. And where 68 and 1 intersect. So once I've got all those coordinates, I'm simply gonna play a little game of connect the dots. And I'm probably gonna not do the best job with these straight lines here either, guys, so bear with me. So I've got 1 there. I also need my coordinate a little to kind of indicate that starting place. And then, of course, connect from here to here, connect from there to there. Oops. Technically, there are lines connecting these others, but it's kind of hard to see because obviously these lines are on the axis already. And then here. And there. And you do need a line. Let me scoot over here a little bit and scoot my arrow over a little bit because you do need a line segment to mark the end here as well. Okay, and there you have it. There is the frequency polygon for this particular set of data.